Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are unpacking the deeply profound narrative of the creation story outlines. We're going to explore how the classic Genesis account of the world's beginnings is vividly brought to life through a completely unique, character-driven story. Instead of just dusting off and reading an old historical text, we're diving into a modern retelling that makes these ancient, massive concepts incredibly accessible and just plain fun to think about. We're jumping straight into the deep end of Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through 5, with a massive question that sets this grand, almost cinematic tone for our entire journey today. Think about this for a second. What existed before the stars, before time, before light itself? It is the ultimate origin question, isn't it? It completely forces us to pause right at the beginning and try to wrap our minds around the sheer magnitude of absolute nothingness before the universe even began. Now, to help us navigate that huge question, the source material introduces this brilliant storytelling mechanism. We meet an old man acting as a teacher to two twin boys. First, there's Mike. He brings the skeptical, highly logical, super science-minded curiosity to the table. He's all about the mechanics of how things work. Then you've got Leo, who views literally everything through a deeply spiritual and imaginative lens, asking those big, ethereal questions. Watching these two totally distinct perspectives bounce off the old man's teachings is what makes this explainer so much more engaging than a standard timeline of events.
All right, let's get into part 1, Before Stars and Time.
So the old man kicks his lesson off by explaining this incredible paradox, the exact moment when literally nothing became everything. And what's absolutely fascinating here is the specific detail that God created a light well before creating the physical sun. Now, Mike, our science-minded twin, naturally struggles with this. He's like, how can there possibly be light without a star to project it? But the old man uses that exact friction to highlight a faith that goes completely beyond human comprehension. It's this foundational lesson for the boys, that the Creator just isn't bound by the physical, scientific rules of the creation itself.
Moving right along to part 2, Bringing Order to Chaos.
Picture the brilliant setting the author chooses for this next bit. The storyteller frames this particular lesson during a dark, stormy evening, using the wild, chaotic weather raging right outside the window to illustrate the formless state of the early earth. The old man tells a story of God bringing order to that exact kind of chaos by separating massive waters to create the sky above. It's beautifully titled, The Day God Painted the Sky. And as the storm howls outside, Mike expresses his usual logical doubts about how waters could physically separate, while Leo's imagination just takes off. He literally pictures a serene heaven resting right on top of those turbulent storm clouds. It is such a powerful emotional lesson about finding divine order right in the middle of wild chaos.
Next up, the retelling gets incredibly hands-on and interactive. The twins are actually outside, getting their hands dirty, planting seeds in the dirt, while the old man explains the moment the earth first turned green. The lesson progresses incredibly fast here, starting from planting tiny little seeds, moving to mighty, life-giving rivers flowing, and finally a glowing Garden of Eden emerging. The source uses this highly cinematic imagery of rapidly growing forests to explain the logical sequence of creation. The big takeaway they learn? Life-giving trees and a sustainable environment absolutely had to be established first before humans could ever even step foot on Earth. It's environmental preparation on a cosmic scale.
But wait. This brings us right back to our scientifically minded twin, Mike. As they're talking about plants, he logically points out a huge question. How could light and vegetation possibly exist and thrive before the sun and moon were even made on the 4th day? I mean, it's a totally fair scientific question, right? Well, the old man answers by explaining that God himself is the ultimate source of that early light. And that prompts an incredibly profound thought. What if heaven needs no sun at all? It completely shifts our perspective, suggesting a reality powered not by giant balls of gas in space, but by the Creator's direct, radiant presence.
Which brings us to part 3, Filling Skies and Seas. To really ground this part of the lesson, the story takes the boys out exploring near a local lake. While they're out there observing nature, the old man describes the awe-inspiring moment when the very first creatures filled the empty oceans and skies. This is a moment where Leo's spiritual perspective really shines. He doesn't just look out and see ordinary fish, he imaginatively pictures these gigantic, ancient sea creatures breaching the surface, actively praising God simply by existing and doing exactly what they were made to do. It adds this wonderful sense of grand adventure to the whole narrative. Then comes the day the land animals finally walked the earth. Now, Mike, being a typical kid who loves science, actually brings up dinosaurs here, making a little joke about them. But the old man doesn't brush the joke off at all. Instead, he leans into it to open up a deeply thoughtful, biblical discussion. Every single creature has a purpose. He explains how every animal, from the tiniest little buzzing insect to the absolute largest dinosaur, was uniquely and intentionally designed for a specific reason within this brand new ecosystem. Literally, nothing was an accident. And finally, Part 4, the purpose of humanity.
When you trace the timeline of creation, it reveals a super clear, deliberate path. We get light on day 1, then the sky and seas, land and plants, the sun and moon, the animals, and then finally, humanity. Seeing it logically laid out step by step like this, the twins naturally ask a fantastic question. Why were humans placed at the very end of this massive chronological sequence? Why were we created last after everything else was already finished?
The old man's answer to that question provides the emotional core of this entire story. He explains that humanity wasn't just some final afterthought. Humanity was the pinnacle. Humans were created last specifically so they could step into a fully prepared, thriving, beautiful world ready to rule and care for creation as its dedicated stewards. But here is the absolute kicker. We were made in God's image. While everything else was spoken into existence, humanity was crafted to uniquely reflect the Creator's own nature.
The story peaks right here, with this incredibly powerful cinematic retelling of God breathing life into Adam. The old man slows his pacing down, emphasizing the exact miraculous moment that mere dust on the ground transforms into living, breathing flesh. It's vividly described as the profound moment the first human opens his eyes for the very first time. By visualizing the breath of life with such incredible detail, the source material takes a thousands of years old text and makes it feel immediate, deeply personal, and honestly breathtaking to the twins, and to us.
So, what is our big takeaway from this explainer today? It's actually a challenge. If the entire universe was carefully ordered specifically for us to care for it, how are we fulfilling that original purpose today? This modern retelling of Genesis isn't just about trying to figure out what happened billions of years ago. It challenges us to look closely at our own place and our own active responsibility right now within the ongoing story of creation. It leaves us wondering, are we actually being the caretakers and stewards we were originally designed to be? It's a massive question to ponder, isn't it?